As you are aware, you have been appointed to serve on this commission at the behest of the Rhode Island General Assembly. I'd like to begin by confirming that you are here of your own free will and have agreed to serve on this commission in order to carry out the purpose of House Bill 8359, House Resolution to create a special legislative commission to study the assets, Rhode Island Fairness Funding Formula. The commission will begin no later than January 15th, ending date of January 27th, 2015. The first order of business is to nominate a chair. Do I have any nomination? Representative Amore.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to nominate Representative J. O'Grady to chair the commission.
Do I hear a second? Seconded already. Do I hear any other nominations? Hearing none, it's closed. Ayes? Nays? No nays. The ayes have it. Chairman O'Grady.
Thank you.
I'm turning this over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Skenyon, members of the committee. I believe the next order of business is to call for a nomination for vice chair. I will open nominations. Do I hear a nomination? I think the chair will nominate Representative Gregory J, and I'll look for a second. And there's a second from Representative Price. Any other nominations? Hearing none. All in favor of this nomination, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. First, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today. Most of you probably know each other, but in case that's not the case, I'd ask that members go around, starting with Mr. Ryan here, and just state your name, who you're affiliated with.
I'm Tim Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island School Superintendents Association.
Great. And if you could just push your button up when you're speaking and down when you're not speaking would be great.
I am Joe Almond. I'm the town administrator from the town of Lincoln, and I'm the president of the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns.
Justin Price. I'm the representative from District 39.
I'm Greg Amore. I represent District 65 in East Providence.
Larry Pirtle, president of NEA Rhode Island.
Jim Parisi with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals.
Lucas Lucier, business manager for the Met School.
Elsa Duray from the Rhode Island Mayoral Academies.
Tim Duffy, the executive director of the Rhode Island Association of School Committees.
Steve Nardelli, executive director of Rhode Island League of Charter Schools.
Department of Education.
Great. Thank you all. Now, the next item on the agenda is one that I think can be rolled into the third one, which is a presentation from myself. And the purpose of this will be to simply scope out what I hope will be an agenda for this committee moving forward, to talk about what is in our purview to discuss, to assess, to analyze, and potentially make recommendations on it at the end of the day. I have prepared a PowerPoint, which I will ask Mr. Salvatore to bring up on the screen, and we can start with slide 1. So this is the House Commission to Study Rhode Island's Fair Funding Formula, and today, of course, is January 15th. Now, our Commission's mandate is found in the language of House Bill 8359, which was passed last year. And this mandate states that the purpose of this commission shall be to make a comprehensive study and assessment of Rhode Island's fair funding formula, including but not limited to okay. Well, I'll proceed, and perhaps you can catch up to me. So again, this commission's purview is to study the fair funding formula and aspects of that formula, including but not limited to the type of expenses funded by the, quote, local appropriation to education from property taxes, end quote, and the extent to which those expenses are fixed or variable, the type of expenses funded by the, quote, state share of the permanent foundation education aid, end quote, and the extent to which those expenses are fixed or variable, the extent to which the total per pupil charter funding obligation shared by the state and LEAs, that's local education authorities, is in line with the mandated fair funding formula percentages. The extent to which funding for expenses borne exclusively by sending charters is sending districts are shifted to charters. The extent to which charter tuition obligations differ between communities, and finally, the extent to which provisions of the fair funding formula impact LEA out-year sustainability. I think we should also talk about what our mandate does not include. It is not within the purview of this commission to speak about outcomes. That is clearly the purview of the Rhode Island Council of Elementary and Secondary Education. I know many of us, well, I won't say us, I know many of you are education experts in and of your own rights, but this commission is not undertaking to assess outcomes. If you'll click to the next. In fact, we can use a quote and be guided by a quote from Council Chairwoman Eva Marie Mancuso that she offered recently when she was asked to consider the financial impact of charter expansion on local districts. And what she said is that we, meaning the Council, are the academic people. We are not the state budget people. And that's a fair and accurate statement. And so the flip side of that, if we move on to the next slide, is that the House of Representative membership is, in fact, the state budget people. And the role of this commission is to inform and advise House membership in its budget-making capacity and to consider the issues that were brought forward in last summer's meetings in North Smithfield, Burrville, and Woonsocket, and also recently in Providence regarding some expanded charter capacity. So this commission has what I believe is a balanced membership. We have 3 House members. We have representatives from Rhode, the League of Cities and Towns, the Association of School Committees. We have representatives from the mayoral academies, the League of Charter Schools, the Met School, Superintendents Association, and Labor. And so I don't think anyone can be accused of stacking this commission in one direction or another. The purpose is to comprehensively and as objectively as possible analyze the issues before us. If we move to the next slide, and the reason that I feel we should undertake this endeavor is that we need to be a reflective body. We passed in 2010 a comprehensive reform to the way we fund education in the state of Rhode Island. And when you implement such a comprehensive reform, it is really in the best interest of the body and of the state to look back at that reform once it's been implemented 4 years out to see how the impacts have gone and whether or not they're in line with what was intended when the bill was originally adopted. And so there's a concept called the continual improvement process. And the core principle of the continual improvement process is the self-reflection of and on implemented processes or feedback. And the purpose of continual improvement process is the identification, reduction, elimination of suboptimal processes and results. And that's what I'm hoping we can get at with this commission. So we're asked to assess the feedback against the program's original goal or goals. And the goals of the fair funding formula can be found in the language of its authorizing legislation, Rhode Island General Law 1672-1, which was titled the Education, Equity, and Property Tax Relief Act. And in the legislative intent section of that law, it is listed a number of goals, and that's, in fact, what we should be assessing at this point. How well has the implementation of this statute measured up against those goals? And so to go through them, we have, at first, the General Assembly recognizes the need for an equitable distribution of resources among the state's school districts, property tax relief, and a predictable method of distributing education aid. School funding systems should treat property taxpayers equitably, limit the portion of school budgets financed by property taxes, and establish sufficient cost controls on school spending. The state should ensure that its school funding structure adequately reflects the different needs of students and closes the educational inequities among the state's school districts. The state education funding system should provide a predictable amount and source of funding to ensure stability in the funding of schools. to promote a school finance system in Rhode Island that is predicated on student need and taxpayer ability to pay. And a new school funding system in the state should promote educational equity for all students and reduce the reliance on the property tax to fund public education. So when we look back at how things have gone, how the implementation has gone, and we assess whether there have been unintended consequences, we can see here what the original intentions were. So against these goals is how we should perform our assessment. So the overall commission task is to examine the implementation of the fair funding formula, to assess whether any unintended consequences have resulted which undermine those goals that we just listed. So this was a big bill. It was years in coming. It took months of debate, probably years of debate before it was implemented, and there are many aspects to it. And so what I've tried to do in light of the mandate in last year's bill and in light of the goals that I've just stated is to break it down into some subtasks. And it would be my intention to have separate meetings that follow this one in which each subtask is examined, witness testimony taken, and a discussion on that testimony for the purposes of assessing how things have gone. So the first one is property tax relief. Property tax relief was included in the title of the bill and was mentioned on our previous slide no less than 3 times. So I think the Commission shall examine, and is right to examine, to what extent property tax relief has been realized by the implementation of the fair funding formula. So the Commission shall examine the difference, if any, between what sending districts are required to remit in tuition payments to charters when a child chooses that option versus the savings to the sending district attributable to the removal of that child. Now, this difference, if any, is the difference between the average local expenditure remitted and the marginal savings realized by the removal of that student. So I've heard from a number of superintendents over the last several months, and in fact even into last year, that told me that this was really the key issue with the fair funding formula. That the fair funding formula is premised on the notion that the funding follows the child, which implies that the expenses also follow the child, and that when a child moves from one district to another, it should be a wash because the funding follows the child and so do the expenses. But what I have been presented evidence to suggest is that that does not, in fact, take place. So I'll give an example of Cumberland, which has run what they call a reabsorption analysis, and I have copies of it here, which I can distribute to the members. And so what they did is they quantified the difference between charter tuition payments for its 286 K-8 charter students and the savings attributable to the district by the removal of those same students from the Cumberland Public Schools. And this analysis returned a difference of $1,412,270 between the average expenditure and the marginal savings to the district. So to continue the example, and to speak specifically to property tax relief, while Cumberland remitted $1.8 million in charge for those 286 K-8 students, it achieved only $462,460 in savings attributable to the removal of those same students. And the $1.4 million difference could be characterized and has been characterized by multiple superintendents that I've spoken with as property tax relief foregone, potentially contrary to the stated goal of the fair funding formula, stated not only in its title, but again at least 3 times in the goal itself. So we'll look at that, and I think we can have a spirited discussion on that, and I hope to look at that issue in our next meeting. There are several superintendents who have indicated their willingness, their enthusiasm at participating in the following meeting and providing testimony. Presumably board members here might have witnesses that can provide other viewpoints on this and provide maybe some other context. So I'd invite or I'd welcome you all to talk to me about who should be invited to present at next meeting as well. Subtask 2 would be looking at sending district obligations versus charter obligations. And again, this is an issue that's been brought to my attention multiple times. So the Commission shall examine the extent to which the local share of education funding, and that is the funding that follows the child, includes cost items borne only by the sending districts and not by the charter schools. Last year there was a bill, House Bill 8023, filed by Patricia Serpa, which proposed to remove the expenses that were only borne by the sending districts and not by the charters entirely from the fair funding formula calculation for charter tuition payments. And what sort of expenses are we talking about? Well, these expenses would include early intervention services for 3 to 5-year-old children. The expenses to provide early intervention services is part of the local spend number, of which charters receive a per pupil portion of, but do not incur those expenses themselves. Similarly, there are post-graduation services for developmentally disabled young adults who transition out of high school but do not reach emancipation until age 21. Those expenses, again, are carried in the public education budget of the sending districts. Charters get a share of that through the fair funding formula, but may in fact not have any of those expenses obligated to them. There are transportation costs. It is my understanding that local sending districts are required to provide transportation for charter students to the charter school and from the charter school back home. That number is carried in the local expenditure number. Charters get a share of the transportation expense without actually providing the transportation themselves. There are out-of-district placements for medically fragile or severely disabled children, and there are also legacy costs. So all of these could be characterized, or it's been purported to me anyways, that they can be characterized as expenses borne solely by the local sending districts and not by the receiving charters. So I'm hoping that this commission can look at that assertion and decide whether it's accurate, and if so, to what extent we're seeing a detrimental impact. So I'll give an example. There's North Providence. Met with their administration just the other day, and what they provided to me was evidence that they are right now sending 63 students, severely disabled students, to out-of-district placements at a significant expense to the district, reflected in and inflating North Providence local share of education funding number. So one question we might look at here is, to what extent, if any, are the 14 charter schools that draw from North Providence obligated to fund similar expenses? Again, it's been asserted that there is this a disproportionate number of out-of-district placements that are the responsibility of the local districts but not the charters. Let's see if that is in fact the case. Subtask 3 would be looking at the funding alignment for differing student need. So the Commission here shall examine the extent to which the special education populations of receiving charter schools is or is not reflective of the special education populations of their sending districts. And I think it's important to note here that the fair funding formula does not enhance state aid for special education populations. It enhances for free and reduced lunch as a proxy for need, but may not in fact be the only proxy for need. I'm sure that was subject of intense debate when the original fair funding formula was being formulated. I wasn't here at the time. It seems to be an issue now, so I hate to bring the debate up again, but I think it's an important one to look at. So to give an example, Achievement First is a mayoral academy that reports a special education population of 5%. Yet it draws from sending districts that report significantly higher special education populations. They draw from Cranston at 15% reported special ed population. From North Providence with a reported 19%. From Pawtucket with a reported special ed population of 17%. From North, I went backwards, but from both Providence and North Providence are at 19%. And finally, Warwick, that reports a population of their special ed students at 20%. So this seems to be a significant disparity, and I think we should look into why that is. There are other charters, I will say, that seem to be more reflective of their sending districts. Beacon Charter, for example, has a 17% reported special ed population, which is in line with the state average. But there are others that are much less so. And so we should look at why that is and the effect it might have on local sending districts. We should also look at the extent to which this discrepancy so again, I think I've skipped through this next slide, but that's essentially what we should look at. I'll note that the source for those numbers are RIDE's 2014 Special Education Census and RIDE's fiscal year 15 final formula calculations. If they're wrong, let's find out that they're wrong. The 5% from Achievement First struck me as being something that should draw our attention. And finally, subtask 4 would be taxpayer equity and cost controls. Again, these are mentioned in the goals of the fair funding formula legislation. So to what extent do tuition payments vary across sending districts which send students to the same charter school? So I'll give an example. Blackstone Valley Prep draws from 4 sending districts that each remit differing tuition payments for students receiving the same education from the same teacher in the same classroom. Blackstone Valley Prep draws from Lincoln, and when a student attends Blackstone Valley Prep from Lincoln, the town of Lincoln remits $15,343. Central Falls remits $14,290. Pawtucket remits $12,319. Cumberland remits $11,365 for an average tuition of $13,329. And I will note here that these are state and local share combined numbers. So if you look at these numbers, it's clear that Lincoln can be seen as subsidizing Cumberland students at about $4,000 per student, despite having a nearly identical community wealth rating according to the fair funding formula state share ratio. And both Central Falls and Pawtucket can also be seen as subsidizing Cumberland students despite dramatically lower community wealth ratings, again, according to the fair funding formula state share ratio. So I think it begs the question of, to what extent is this seeming inequity pervasive among other sending districts? How can it be explained? And is that, in fact, in line with the intentions of the fair funding formula when it was set up? And this above example really raises the question as to what is the actual cost to educate a student at a charter school. So we look at, and I chose Blackstone Valley Prep as an example just because I'm from Lincoln and I'm more familiar with this than others, but it's also easier to get your hands on because it only draws from 4 districts. We have an average tuition of $13,329. Is that what it costs to educate? Is it less than that? Is it more than that? I'm not sure. But it seems to me that it's not $15,343, nor is it $11,365, yet towns are paying differently. So to what extent also are the cost controls called for in the fair funding formula implemented? And I'll give this example. Village Green Academy is a virtual charter school. And while we know what the tuition figures are for the sending districts to Village Green, the actual costs are not readily apparent or available, and the budgeting is not done in a public process as it would be done in a local district. I know that my school committee has to fight for every dollar, and justifiably so. Their budget is proposed, vetted, debated before a school committee. It is then voted, debated, analyzed before a budget board. It is then debated, analyzed, and criticized in some cases before a financial town meeting. It has full public vetting. That is not the way charter school tuitions work under the fair funding formula. It is simply a function of how much the local districts send. And so Village Green Academy, which has a couple of rented rooms, as I understand it, at the Roger Williams Continuing Education Facility downtown, with some computers that students sit in front of and are purported to be self-directed. Does that have the same cost structure as any of the sending districts that are paying a per pupil share for people to go there? And if not, what is that money being spent on? So these are things that I think should be looked at as well. So I've laid out a fairly ambitious agenda, I think, but I know we're up for the task. I'm a layman to this topic, and so I'm pleased to be joined on this commission by people who are not. I'm hoping that we will view this as a fact-finding endeavor, and that we will be open-minded coming into it. Again, the things that we want to look at is the extent to which the implementation of the fair funding formula has resulted in property tax relief. We want to look again at the sending district obligations versus the charter obligations, and to what extent there may be some disparities there. We want to look at the funding alignment with differing student needs and differing student populations, and we want to look at taxpayer equity across districts that send to the same school, as well as cost controls that may or may not be in place. I would propose that the next meeting be on January 23rd, which is next Friday at 3 p.m. I have, again, a number of school superintendents who would like to testify on the first issue. Many of them have done a reabsorption analysis. It's my understanding that perhaps the Rhode Island Association of School Superintendents has requested that committees or that superintendents run this analysis to look at, again, the difference between average expenditures in the form of tuition payments versus marginal savings attributable to sending districts, again, attributable to the removal of a child from that district. I'm open for additional witnesses, so I would ask that you, contact me as soon as possible to get folks lined up for this. I suppose I should ask, is next Friday a convenient date for the membership? Hearing no objection, we can do it next Friday. I'm hoping that we can do this on 4 consecutive Fridays, and it may be, that there's some reason why we need not to do it. Perhaps it snows or something like that. But this is a good time of year to get study commissions underway and to get working on it. It is not my intention, everyone will be relieved, to go through a lengthy PowerPoint at the next meeting or the meeting after that. So I'm sure you'll all breathe a sigh of relief at that news. But the idea today was to lay out what I hope the direction of this commission will be, and to get you all thinking about who the appropriate witnesses are and what sort of data we can bring to make sure this is a fully informed discussion. So I'll open it up for comments or any discussion at this point. Hearing, yes. And I'm sorry if you could just state your name again.
Yeah, I will. Is this on? Yeah, good. I'm Andrea Costantino from the Department of Ed. I want to start by thanking Rep. O'Grady for such a great framing of this issue. I think we can probably all agree that it's timely and that there's a lot of important discussion that needs to happen around it. I think the subtasks are organized in a very cogent way that will enable us to move through the content productively. I also think that each of those subtasks could be thought of as something that really is connected to core data or functionality within the formula itself. And it makes me wonder if it might be useful to, not killing anyone with PowerPoint, but kind of have an opportunity to frame each of those subtasks relative to high-level information that grounds us all in a similar knowledge base. So, for example, I think some of the subtasks really relate to core mechanics of the formula. Some of the subtasks relate to demographic or expenditure data. Some of the subtasks relate to the potential effect of precipitous enrollment changes. Those are all things that, if it is of interest to you and to the committee, we'd be happy to prepare, kind of like a 1 or 2 page brief on each of those 3 areas that might inform us all and set us all up for some mutual understanding on the topic.
Yeah, I think that would be useful if it were brief, sort of framework setting. Are you proposing that you would want to do this at the beginning of each of the meetings, or just do you think one, particular presentation might be useful?
Well, I want to be responsive to the interests of the committee. I think that if we focus very heavily on brevity, but think about maybe the first session is starting with 5 minutes on the core mechanics of the formula, that's sort of the foundational underpinning of the remainder of the conversations, and then we could introduce the other pieces as they seem most relevant to the conversation.
Do other members have an opinion on that?
I'd welcome the information. It might be valuable if you have some written documents to share it with the commission members prior to the meetings, so that if it generates some issues or questions, that could be ready to go at the beginning of our next meeting.
That sounds great. I think, and I apologize, I have to admit that this particular PowerPoint came together sort of late in the week, this week, late in the night, last night, as a matter of fact. So I was unable to share this with you ahead of time. But I agree with Jim that it would probably be something that would generate some questions and be useful to have ahead of time. Other thoughts or comments? And again, we're focused on brevity. Is that correct? All right, perfect. Excellent. Anyone else? Comments or questions at this point? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? I hear a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you all so much.